So, anybody remember the movie Hot Shots with Charlie Sheen? And he's in the elevator with this woman, and he says, "Wow, that's an incredible perfume." And she says, "That's Vicks, I have a cold." And he says, "Incredible." So, I have a cold. So, I wanted to talk about something. Yeah, that's what I want to talk about. I used to root for Trump. I'm not an American. I don't even know why I'm interested in American politics. But I used to root for Trump because I saw the corruption, and that's not even an appropriate word to use, of the Clintons. So I thought I'm talking about that because many people talk about Julian Assange and the Wikileaks emails and so on, but they never read it. So I want to talk about that, and if there's time. So anyway, I'm going to start. So the Clintons came from Arkansas, and Bill Clinton used to be the governor of Arkansas, and he was famous in his own right for being what's called a Lebemann in German, like he was living it up. So nobody would have ever known that he was and all this corruption stuff. Nobody would have ever known that if he had not become president. And so anyway, the Clintons. So there's a term for which what happened after Clinton became president, and the term is Arkancide, like homicide or suicide. Arkancide. And this was a phenomenon in Arkansas for many years, and the list of people who mysteriously died, like ex-attorneys or ex-associates, because Hillary Clinton used to work as an attorney, ex-boyfriends, ex-girlfriends, even two 14 and 15-year-old boys were found obviously killed, and the guy who does the autopsies, he got famous. His name was Fahmy Malek, and he was famous because they had like a shotgun wound or like a broken nose, and they were obviously like when you use a rifle and punch it in someone's face, their noses were broken and so on, but it was ruled a suicide. So this guy got famous for his insane rulings of the cause of death, and the official cause of death of these two 14 and 15-year-old boys was suicide, but they were found like basically with torture wounds, and then they were laid on oh man, I'm grasping for words. So they were laid on a where the trains go through. They were laid on the train tracks, and they were like you know, put into 3 or 4 pieces, each of them, but still you could see that they had like their nose broken and so on, so they must have been happening before that. That was obvious for anybody. So but that's just the beginning. So there was a guy who many people died, people got scared, so everyone who was involved with them got very scared in Arkansas. There was one story of a guy who went to a bar and he talked to the barkeeper and he gave him his gold ring and his gold watch, and he said that something bad's going to happen and I want you to have it. So and the barkeeper thought he was like exaggerating. He said that he was involved with the Clintons and something bad's going to happen. And next day in the papers, he hung himself accidentally or something like that. So suicide by hanging is a very effective way to get away with murder. So then there was one woman. There is a whole documentary, or many of them. There was one documentary where just the names of the people who were involved in Arkansas with them, who died mysteriously, like Vince Foster, who was the boyfriend of Hillary Clinton. He was an attorney. He was pretty a successful, famous attorney. He was found with 2 bullet wounds or 3 in his head, and the coroner ruled it a suicide. So tell me, how are you going to shoot yourself 3 times in the head? You know, usually after you shoot yourself in the head 1 time, you stop. And that's just like the tip of the iceberg. So I can't go into any details. So there was this woman who she was in prison, and that was her. Like maybe she was lucky in that way because they left her alone. So she was in prison. She was interviewed, and she said she used to go to what they called toga parties. You know, a toga is like a Roman sheet wrapped around you, and she said they didn't have cocaine, they had buckets full of coke, and you could like easily take 20 grams out of there. Nobody would have noticed that. It was insane how much cocaine was involved there. So that brings me to Mena, Arkansas, and what happened there. There's this airport in Arkansas, Mena Airport, which is a very, very small airport, mainly for private people. So, and they took over the airport basically, and people who worked there, like, suddenly they had to wear security badges and you were not allowed into that area and so on. So what they did there, they had airplanes with so there's no dictionary for that word in English, so doppelter Boden, that's what I'm trying to say. So they had these airport planes with like under the floor there were huge compartments, and one of the pilots was a man called Barry Seal, and he used to brag about working for the CIA, and which that later developed into the Whitewater scandal. And the Whitewater scandal is a very famous scandal in American politics, the Whitewater story. So they used to deliver guns to Nicaragua, and they were paid in cocaine, and they used to fly that coke back into Mena, Arkansas. And if you ever wondered why there was a crack epidemic, now you know. So the Clinton emails, Donald Trump said, "I am going to drain the swamp in Washington and the deep state," and back then nobody even knew what the deep state is. So, but I knew, so I was rooting for him. So so when Julian Assange made Hillary's emails public, he made himself some very, very powerful enemies, and I'm not really sure if he really knew what was coming for him, because as I said before, these people are Luciferians. If you just watch the photos of Epstein Island, he had an Egyptian temple on Epstein Island. So why is there an Egyptian temple on Epstein Island? Because these people worship their gods, and that's not our God. So if that's too conspiracy theory to you, then I don't know what to say. So Barry Seal, when this all blew up in the Whitewater scandal, he was indicted, but I think he was granted immunity for so he was granted immunity for his testimony, and he was killed before he could go to court. So before he had an opportunity to speak, he was killed by 12 Peruvian or maybe even Nicaraguan assassins. 12. And these people were so like that where he was killed, that was a very peaceful small neighborhood, and these people, they looked Nicaraguan, they all had like machine guns with them, and they were immediately arrested, of course. They didn't use silencers or anything, so they mowed this guy down in the streets, and then they were all arrested. And who would have known, they were all pardoned by Bill Clinton. So that's going to be a long video, I guess. So the documentary about the emails. So the emails, I read some of it. I don't think anybody read that stuff, because people talk about that and they have no idea what was in these emails. Like, these emails were so incriminating. Nobody read them. I don't know anybody who ever read Wikileaks. It's like it never existed. So now he's rotting in some prison somewhere for that. People don't read it. So what was in these emails? There were a lot of code words used, obvious code words, like cheese, pizza, blah 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 blah, which relates to Pizzagate, so on. So anyway, but that's just a conspiracy theory. There's no such thing as Pizzagate, and there's no such thing as human trafficking, obviously. So in the emails, she wrote in one email to her campaign manager, John Podesta. She wrote, there was one email to him where it says, there is a map of you. I can't remember the whole thing, but basically these were all code words. Officially on the FBI website, you just have to read them to understand what it means. So like cheese pizza would be a little boy and a little girl, something like that. Don't even want to talk about it, it's so sickening. And these people have like artwork in their home, mainly of serial killers. One of the statues in John Podesta's home is the posture in which a victim of Jeffrey Dahmer was found, and it decorates the living room. So you know where these people are coming from. If you can't see that, I don't know what to tell you. Like, their art collection should be enough to, I don't know, put them behind bars or in a mental home. It's insane. Like tortured children hanging from the ceiling and stuff like that. So there was one email where she writes, if he would come to the spirit cooking dinner of Marina Abramovich, and if his brother would join them in the spirit cooking dinner. If you don't know what spirit cooking is, read up on it. So it comes from Aleister Crowley. Sorry, I have no voice. So so there was a lot of that stuff in the emails. There was also one email where she wrote, if John would come, Podesta, because there will be some entertainment for him. One is 14 and one is 12 years old. So, and now I'm going to stop talking about it or I'm going to puke. So that's about the Clinton emails. There's also a story about a guy who investigated the claims against the Clinton Foundation, supposedly because of Chelsea Clinton wanting to know what's going on and to disprove all the lies against their parents. And she, Chelsea, had a man go in there and look over the finances. And she wanted him to be the next CFO of the Clinton Foundation, something like that. And this guy worked there like a few days, and then he vanished and with his family, and he sought political asylum in Russia. So you know where these people are coming from. Obviously he didn't find anything, that's why he left in the middle of the night with his whole family and went to Russia. That's another story. So then the victims of the Clintons, which are all mentioned by name at the very end of the documentary, is like, I don't know, several pages full of names, just like this in the beginning of Star Wars, like blah 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 blah. Must have been like 200 names or more. So I can't go into any detail because that would take too long. So then there's the story about ADFA. ADFA was the Arkansas Development Fund. It should have been a fund for churches and schools to give money to like impoverished areas and people who really need it, and it was a government institution. I'm not sure if Bill he took that over in Arkansas when he was not yet president, and they used ADFA, and he put his fixer in there. So if his fixer, what is a fixer? A fixer is someone who fixes problems, like he paid bribes and so on. He bribed people to shut up and so on. And this guy later talked, so he told his whole story. Like he told the story that he said to Bill Clinton, I heard that your wife is once a month leaving town to, I don't know, some big city and having a meeting with a witchcraft coven. And he said to him, do you know what would happen if that gets out? Tell her to stop. So Hillary Clinton was back then already involved with this witchcraft coven that comes straight from him. That's not something I'm making up. So his fixer talked. If I can remember his name, I can't remember his name. Put it in the comments if I remember his name. So this guy talked, and he talked for a long time. He got lung cancer, something like that, and it was like kind of like a deathbed confession about what he did. He used to work for military, and then he worked for Clinton. So, and he basically had to make sure that when Bill was meeting with women, that people wouldn't speak, and he would make sure that if people had seen something, that he would make them an offer they can't refuse. And if you know what I mean by that, that's basically like what the Mafia does. An offer you can't refuse is like you go in there with a suitcase and you tell the person that, look, you can take this suitcase with $50,000 in it, or I have 3 bullets with your name on it and your wife's name on it and your firstborn's name on it, and they will find them eventually. Whatever you do, I don't care if you're the chief of police or whatever. So that's an offer you can't refuse. That's what he did. Basically, that was his job to do that. So this guy talked and talked and talked and talked. I can't remember all the details, but it was pretty eye-opening. He told everything about Whitewater, blah 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 blah, but of course that's just a conspiracy theory, so nobody listened. So yeah, so ADFA, they took over the Arkansas Development Fund, which was basically to give out money to churches and schools. And they used that government institution because the drug money got so huge that they couldn't just like wash the money easily, and it got too much. So they used ADFA to wash like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that was when he was governor. So then he became president. And then was this period of Fahmy Malek and Arkancide. And there are still many people talking about Arkancide. There is still a mother of this 15-year-old boy who still seeks justice for what happened. It's what's basically impossible if the guy is president. So I don't think she's talking anymore. So that's that. Also, like I said, I rooted for Donald Trump because he said, I'm going to drain the swamp in Washington, and I'm going to put an end to the deep state. And then they pulled this PSYOP, this psychological operation, which is called Q, or QAnon. And many people believed in QAnon. And I used to believe in QAnon many years ago, but I saw this, that it's a PSYOP. And ever so many times Donald Trump let like some inside saying of QAnon in a tweet or something, and people were like, yeah, Q is real, QAnon is real, and so on. So that's also why you see people with t-shirts with a huge Q on it, and in my opinion it's fake. So anyway, then there was also why Donald Trump, they call him the Orange Man, or Orange Man, and there are many memes like Orange Man bad, Orange Man bad. And what's very funny to me is that the color orange is associated with Freemasonry. So maybe he is a Freemason, I don't know. But anyway, that's just a thought, just a funny thought. Orange Man. So I don't have a lot of hope anymore with Donald Trump. I used to have, but that's gone a long time now. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, when John F. Kennedy said, I'm going to splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces. At that time, the Mafia and the CIA were basically indistinguishable from each other, because many CIA guys used to work for the Mafia on the side as associates, and vice versa, because the Mafia guys had so many connections into the underworld, into the criminal world and so on, and the CIA did a lot of criminal stuff. And this was all made legal by what's called the National Security Act. So through that mechanism of the National Security Act, which George Bush Sr. put in place, it was possible to make some things not public, and it should be a republic, a democratic republic. I mean, there are many people who say that it's not a democracy. America was never a democracy. America is a constitutional republic, but anyway, it's a republic, which means res publica, so everything should be public knowledge. By the mechanism of the National Security Act, that changed legally. So if there was a case in court about like MK Ultra and so on, this was no longer made public. So that's also something that people should know, and that's also why you never hear about that stuff. You can find courtroom proceedings about MK Ultra, and I think there's one video left about people talking about Joseph Mengele. And if that's too much of a conspiracy theory, then so be it. Anyway, so these like victims, they were paid a lot of money for what happened to them, and MK Ultra was not just like a program within the CIA. This went on in hospitals, this went on in prisons, and so on. So they used to experiment with drugs, even lethal doses of LSD administered by a doctor intravenously. The person died, of course, from this huge dose of LSD, and they would note how long it takes and so on. That's basically what the Nazi doctors were doing, and that's also why there was a separate Nuremberg proceeding just for the doctors. So, so Kennedy wanted to splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces because it was so corrupt. The head of the CIA at that time was Allen Dulles, and he was later the head of the Warren Commission, or at least he was a member of the Warren Commission. And this guy made sure that the public would never find out what really happened to JFK. So also what many people don't know is that the Mafia is also a spiritual organization, and if you, for example, if you become a made member, which means you are basically a real Mafia guy, and there was like not a lot of them, but still I think like the Colombo family had 150, something like that, made members, and they all had to swear a blood oath on Halloween night. They have to cut their finger with a knife, and they would swear to never speak about that, which is like the omerta, to never speak about or betray their brothers. And when the blood was dripping on the floor, they would get a picture of a saint, and they put it in their hands, and it would be lit on fire. And when the picture was burned up, the ashes of that would be rubbed into the blood. So that's a legitimate blood oath that you take, which also has massive spiritual consequences if you ever leave them. So, and many mobsters who left had to basically find Jesus, because it's a spiritual contract that you do. And like the Bible says, you should never swear an oath by anything. Jesus said you should never swear an oath to anything or anybody, not even by God, and so on. So anyway, that's the initiation ritual that you have to do when you get in, when you are becoming a made member, basically. So as far as I know, there were 2 persons who talked, or as far as I'm familiar with them, there are 2 persons who talked after they left the Mafia. And one of them was Richard Kuklinski, and one of them was Sammy the Bull Gravano. And they spilled all the beans, they told everything, because otherwise they would have gotten like 250 years in prison. And Sammy the Bull seriously got out of prison, so he basically got immunity for his testimony. So he told everything about the Gambinos, about his boss was the Teflon Don, can't remember his name, had to Google it. So his name was John Gotti, and he was the boss of the biggest of the 5 families, which was the Gambino family. And Sammy the Bull still has like a bounty on his head for a lot of money, so he cannot show his face in public, and he is in witness relocation. The first time he got out in 1993, something like that, he Sammy the Bull was let go from prison into witness protection or witness relocation program. So, and what did he do? The first thing, he basically was the mastermind of a ecstasy ring in Arizona. So he was and his whole family was involved with that. So he and his whole family went to prison because they had this massive MDMA ecstasy ring in Arizona, and he went to prison again, and now he's again a free person, and he's doing interviews. Also, a guy named Michael Franzese, or Michael Franzese, he talks, and his father went to prison for 50 years when he was 50 years old. Sonny Franzese, his father, and he was just let go of prison. They call him the geriatric gangster. He's 100 years old now, and he's still Sonny Franzese. So these people never change, and it's just like an addiction. You cannot get rid of these criminal impulses. It's too hard to do that if you like, you know, if you grew up extorting people and killing people and stuff. Having a normal life after that is very, very hard. So these people usually never change. So that's also why Sammy the Bull, he like already was basically would have gone to prison for the rest of his life. I think he got 250 years or something like that. And what does he do? The first thing he comes out, he masterminds this ecstasy ring, immediately goes to prison again. And it's not, if you watch the movie Goodfellas, it's not really that romantic to be involved with that. And if you want to hear a real testimony of a real underboss, which is like the second highest rank possible in the Mafia, then you have to listen to Michael Francis. He's the son of Sonny Francis, who was just let go. It was just in the papers like 2 days ago that he was let go from prison after 50 years. He went into prison when he was 50 and he got out when he was 100 years old. Now he's a free man again. And maybe he will start an ecstasy ring too or something. So then there was this second incredible interview with an associate of the Mafia, Richard Kuklinski. And back then I must have watched his interview like, I don't know, many dozens of times, because it's so outrageous what he's talking about, and he's completely non-emotional about it. Like, he explains that the first time he got involved because he owed money or something, and he worked for a film cutting company where they used to make films and sell them, and he was he had a gambling debt, and then he had to produce pornographic movies for them. That's how he got involved, and from that it escalated, and he was already, but he's a complete psychopath. So he used to kill people. He said he said different numbers, but the number that I believe is like he must have killed over 100 people. And the FBI caught him basically when he was already over 60 years old, and he was a killer when he was like 18. He had committed his first murder before he was 18. So he used to talk about how to Richard Kuklinski used to talk about how to get rid of bodies, and he laughed when he got the question, how did you get rid of all the bodies? And he laughed, and he said, how do you dispose of something? You just throw it away. You can put it in a big drum, you can put it in the back of a car and have it crushed, you can put it on a park bench. And then he laughs again, and he says, they must have found a few people sitting on park benches, I'm sure. And sure enough, they found a lot of people like sitting on a park bench, dead. And the way he used to kill people was undetectable back then, and maybe still is undetectable. He also used shotguns, knives, and so on. So strangulation, all these things. but he also used to use cyanide, and he put it in like a spray bottle that you use when you have a cold or something, to spray it in your mouth. He put cyanide in there, and he would go by a person or pass a person on the street, and he would put a tissue before his nose and mouth and pretended to sneeze and sprayed the person in the face, and he said they would drop dead within 30 seconds from a heart attack. And cyanide in the body is destroyed immediately. So cyanide is just it's just a C carbon with a triple bind to nitrogen, and this would dissolve in the body within an hour. So if you don't find that person within half an hour, when you do an autopsy, you could never find cyanide in the body, because it's destroyed that rapidly in the body. And he used to do that for 50 years. And the FBI guy who investigated him, Richard Kuklinski, he was like shaking when he talked about this guy. He was like physically shaking when he talked about this guy and how dangerous he is. And he said, we came on his tracks basically when he was already like 45-50 years old, because we noticed that everywhere he went, people would end up dead. Like when and back then you could legally, without any problem, have a pistol with you in a plane. There were no laws against that, so he would fly somewhere, kill that person. He just got a picture of him, he said, and that was his life. So, and that was also his hobby. Like he laughed and he said once he used a remote control car for children with dynamite on it, and he drove that remote controlled car with his friend who was called Mr. Softy, because he sold ice cream in a Mr. Softy ice cream truck. And his friend was also a complete psychopath, and he got him the cyanide and so on. And he was also an expert for demolition, and he used to work for the military in demolition. And when he drove his ice cream truck, he used to poison some of it and so on. So this guy was a complete psychopath. I never could find out his real name, but this guy must have also killed like hundreds of people, and he used different poisons. He was like an expert on poisons and explosives. And Richard Kuklinski laughed and said once he used a remote controlled car and drove under the car of some mafia guy and blew him up with it. And he did that for at least 50 years, maybe longer. And his family never had a clue that he was involved with that. Never. Only after he was indicted and in the courtroom and confessed to, I think he confessed to 6 murders. And in prison then he talked, and it was also basically a deathbed confession, because yeah, it's unbelievable. If you ever want to hear a mafia story to completely creep you out, you have to go on YouTube and type in Richard Kuklinski and listen to his first testimony. there were 3 interviews with him, and like, it's unbelievable, completely unbelievable, that this guy had a double life where he killed like over 100 people, and also he used to feed people to rats when they were still alive and stuff like that, and he used to videotape that and sell it as porn, and these videos would go for $50,000, $100,000, something like that. So if some mafia guy did something wrong, they put Kuklinski on him. So, and he was like famous for being this, and this guy is like, I don't know, 6'6", 300 pounds, which is like 135 kilos, and 2 meters and 5 or something. So he was huge. Like he said, when he wore his leather jacket, and he usually had 3 pistols on him always, and a knife. So that was like, and the CIA was involved with these people. That's the reason why JFK wanted to put a stop to CIA. And there's a photo, seriously, there's a photo of George H.W. Bush in 1969 at Dealey Plaza, where JFK was killed on that day. It's a black and white photo, but still, and it's from pretty far away, but you can see the way he used to have his hair combed to one side, and the way he used his body posture. He always had a suit on, a black suit and a black tie, and you could see just from his face that this must have been him. And there was also a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, on George H.W. Bush and what he did for the CIA. And seriously, there was a George Bush stationed in Texas at that time, and later they said that was another George Bush, that's not President Bush. But if you look at the photo, it's obviously him. So that's also like a mystery. This guy must have been like the most powerful person in American politics. And how do you get up that high? He used to be an oil man. He used to sell oil. So how do you get that high up if you're not involved in that cult? And also know some secrets that can never ever be spoken about. And by the way, this sign is the invocation of Harpocrates, or Harpocrat, and Harpocrates was in the Egyptian pantheon, he was the god of silence. So that's an invocation, this sign. And Richard Kuklinski once was also interviewed by a psychiatrist, and I think this guy got a little scared because like, you could see like he was like moving a little back in his seat when he began to talk, and he told him like the psychiatrist asked him, what did you feel when you did your first mob hit? And he said, it surprised me. And he said, what surprised you? And he said, yeah, we were driving in a car, and I had a shotgun, a sawed-off shotgun, and we were driving by another car, and I shot into the window at the driver, and the shotgun blast would take his whole head off. So the shotgun took his whole head off, and he said, "That surprised me." That's it. And yeah, that must have been one of the most incredible testimonies that I've ever heard, or the most incredible deathbed confession. He was later, he said he was being poisoned, and he died. And I think his corpse turned blue, as far as I know, from his wife or his one of his children. His fingers were blue, so maybe he was poisoned with arsenic. And yeah, so now I ranted for an hour, and I think I'm going to stop there. Yeah, so thanks for listening, and good day.